Hello and welcome. My name is Susie West, and today I am interviewing Dan French, who is the founder and CEO at Consider. Looking specifically at Chapter 2 in this series with Dan French, we're going to be talking today about risk, specifically identifying and eliminating waste and error within the finance function. Again, something that is front of mind for shared services organisations. So, hello Dan.
Hi, Susie.
So let's kick off with shared services in mind. Looking at risk and identifying and eliminating waste and error, why is this so important for shared services right now?
Well, I think this does relate a little bit to the issue about financial control, which we talked about before. But in shared services, we are centralizing and standardizing the large base of transaction processing, particularly for finance transactions through the business. And because we're consolidating that, hopefully we're improving and optimizing, but it also can magnify any issues. So if, for example, you've got some wastage or just erroneous activity taking place, if you don't catch it early, it can multiply and it can be a substantial impact on the performance of the business. So shared services as the owner of those, or as a key stakeholder in those processes, certainly need to be alert to those topics.
And could you share with us some examples of where this has happened?
I think probably still the most common and egregious example is duplicate payments. Now, clearly, a good system of financial control should hopefully make sure duplicate payments don't happen. But for lots of reasons, most of which are behavioral, both in the company, between organizations and with suppliers, they do happen with other companies. And the trick, a lot of organizations today retain third-party contingent recovery firms who will go through using human labor and perhaps a bit of analytic to work out duplicate payments, and they will charge 20 to 30% of the recovery of that money. They'll keep that, that'll be their fee, and the company concerned gets 70 to 80% of their cash back. But that's probably a bit late in the day, and you're talking about real cash, sometimes with the processing of invoices from vendors. Sometimes vendors they will chase invoices that go through a system, and somebody in the business say, we've got to pay this vendor, it's really important. And I've seen this happen. Somebody in the accounts payable area will process the invoice and get it paid, and someone has already done it. And they get coded in a slightly different way. So there's lots of impacts there, and there's some things that can be done to improve that. But finding duplicate invoices before they become duplicate payments is a pretty key thing.
And just kind of helping the audience just segregate this in their minds a little bit. So in Chapter 1, we were talking about control and compliance and specifically financial control. How does this topic of risk and identifying and eliminating waste and error differ from the conversation around financial control?
That's a really good point. It is very closely related. The reason why I tend to regard it as a separate activity is because broadly, within an organization's financial compliance controls, they try to do their best to make sure that an invoice coming through the process gets dealt with properly. What often slips through the net is this point of duplicate invoices coming in from outside, and this is an example where detection has to meet prevention. You try to put prevention in your financial control system, but the reality is there's lots of ways that these things come in. We have discussions with companies who are processing tens of millions, and in some cases nearly 100 million a year in duplicate payments, and they're paying external companies 20 to 30% of that to get it back. So that's an awful lot of money. Mm-hmm. A, it's after the fact, so it's got a big impact on cash flow. Secondly, they're losing money out of it. And thirdly, it gives there's a lot of management and administrative effort in making that happen. Mm-hmm. So I regard it as an adjunct to financial control, but it often falls outside the primary remit of ensuring that our internal control over financial reporting is working effectively. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of other examples as well. For example, travel and entertainment expenses in a large organization, it's a big deal, and there's potentially fun and games that goes on there, which again is another area of risk which sometimes falls outside the key financial control area.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, potential insider fraud, that would fall more under the kind of the risk umbrella than the financial controls umbrella.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because many of the financial control objectives for under control and compliance are there to eliminate the risk of fraud. But there are still many ways of these things happening, as in the T&E example, and you need to have some way some program of at least periodically doing some detective work to make sure that you're not being abused by somebody trying to defraud you. And there's many, we've all read the press articles. We don't get any less frequency of press articles about people who've managed to defraud their companies out of substantial sums of money.
And who owns the area of risk? Who does that sit under?
It tends to vary by organisation. Sometimes it sits under the financial controller. Sometimes it sits with internal audit. And sometimes it sits with another risk executive. And in certain cases, I've seen it report into shared services because shared services processes pretty much every payment, every element of cash going out of the company goes through shared services, accounts payable. Therefore, it's sometimes a good place to implement that process there.
So what I find when I talk to shared services directors and managers about risk is occasionally it doesn't seem to have the urgency or the prominence that other areas, other drivers might have. For example, process efficiency or the cost reduction driver. And sometimes I get the impression, although it is important for a business, sometimes it could be considered a little bit of an afterthought. This could be an unfair reading of the market, but my question to you is, why should a shared services organisation or a finance operation make this one of their top priorities, and indeed should they?
Well, I think it's a fair concern that people have, and I think some of that comes from the whole risk world is filled with academic observations and complexity and theories and all the rest of it. The reality is, as executives, we're all focused on improving the quality of service and reducing the cost. Now, if waste and error exists within our processes, or the risk of waste and error exists in our processes, that is a key part of driving both those objectives. So whether or not you look at, let's say, duplicate invoices as part of reducing your cost, because it costs a lot of money to be processing multiple things and reconciling them after the event. So, this is all part of the same story. These things all come together in cost reduction and service improvement. So whether you call it risk and I can I'm quite happy with, work with some clients who I put this under the process improvement umbrella. Labels are useful, so you can use the label you want to use. But there's no doubt at all, if you can eliminate wastage and you're going to save on the cash that gets inappropriately dispersed, and you're going to save on the effort, which is both doing that activity and, far more importantly, the asymmetric effort of fixing it after the event.
Dan, let's close off this chapter with the 3 or 4 or 5 things that you really need to have in place to eliminate or significantly reduce your chances of risk.
Yeah, I think, as we've discussed, risk is a big topic. I think the focus here is eliminating waste and error. I think it's very important to focus on those areas where cash leaks out of the company. So we talked about a couple of those, and those where culturally the impact could be very damaging, like travel and entertainment expenses. Keep people together, work out what the risk is, and even just doing an annual or 6-monthly diagnostic using some data analytics experts to work out, is anything slipping through the net of, do we see tire tracks in the snow? That's a critical piece.
Okay, great. Dan French, thank you very much. And make sure that you join me and Dan in Chapter 3, where we're going to be talking about KPIs and key exception indicators.